Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Luis Ortiz, Charles Martin officially confirmed, and also confirmed on pay-per-view, but at a slightly lower price. So we'll touch on that aspect of this fight, because I'm sure a lot of fans will be just cocking their eye a little bit, going, really? Pay-per-view? Because Charles Martin, Luis Ortiz couldn't sell out a phone booth. But it's a really good card that has been announced. So 5 heavyweight fights on this card, and most of them are going to be pretty competitive. So what we'll do is we'll roll through this press release, a few comments, and I will be doing videos closer to the time. So this card is going to be headlined, obviously, Ortiz and Martin, Frank Sanchez, Carlos Negron, the co-main event. January the 1st, it's going to be in Hollywood, Florida, United States. So we're kicking off the new year with a good card, 5 heavyweight fights. For my purposes, I mean, I love the card. I'm going to get it. I'll pay whatever the cost is here where I am in New Zealand. But I know a lot of people will be sort of looking at this going, is this worth the bread? And that's a very good sort of question, because it's a bit of a risky move, because this day and age with the pandemic, obviously there's costs involved with all these heavyweights, but a lot of fans sort of watching their purse strings as well. But you can see here on screen the banner, and then the headline says the event headlined by top heavyweight Luis Ortiz battling former world champion Charles Martin in IBF heavyweight title eliminator Saturday, January 1 from Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida. And I wondered if it was going to be a title eliminator, because Martin, he currently occupies a very high spot in the IBF rankings, courtesy of his last fight, which was all the way back at the start of 2020 when he starched Gerald Washington. That was on the undercard of Fury Wilder 2, so feels like a long time ago, and this fight's not actually for a couple of months yet. Also, the card features Frank Sanchez against Puerto Rican Olympian Carlos Negron in the co-main event, and then it's also got Jonnie Rice versus Michael Polite-Coffiee 2, Gerald Washington versus Eren Demirezen, Viktor Faust, or his real name is Viktor Vykhryst, Faust is a name that he's been given in Germany, easier to say, etc., versus Iago Kiladze. So there's some good matchups there. Some of them aren't necessarily ones where there's a lot on the line in terms of heavyweight sort of division relevance, in terms of what it's going to mean for the division, but there are some competitive fun fights there. So what we'll do is we'll get to some comments first. We'll circle back to the pay-per-view stuff a little bit later on. So just getting down to, where are the comments here? So Luis Ortiz, Charles Martin says, nobody wants to fight me and nobody wants to fight Ortiz. So we'll fight each other. I'm going to show the world on January 1 why I deserve a title shot. I paid my dues and I want my belt back. Beating Ortiz is going to get me one step closer to that goal in order to become a 2-time heavyweight champion. I have to get past Ortiz, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. And actually, we skipped Ortiz here, so we'll just get back to him. So he says, I can't wait to give my fans in South Florida a great show on New Year's Day and earn another shot at a heavyweight title. Charles Martin is a good fighter, but he's standing in my way. The only thing on my mind is getting in the ring and making a big statement in this fight to show again why I'm feared by the heavyweight division. And I know that there will be some fans asking the question, what has Luis Ortiz done to sort of, parachute his way into a title eliminator? It's a good question, because obviously coming off 2 years ago, a loss to Deontay Wilder and 45 seconds of action against Alexander Flores since. So not exactly the deepest sort of run to get back to a potential heavyweight title shot, but if he beats Martin and beats him well, it again proves you're only sometimes 1 or 2 fights away from a heavyweight title. Sometimes you can be Johnny on the spot for a good fight, and then obviously it can lead to something bigger and better. Getting to Frank Sanchez, so he's up against Carlos Negron. He says, I'm happy to be back so soon after beating a Jugba, but the work is only beginning. There's so much more to be done. I believe I will be the first heavyweight champion in Cuban history. Negron is a strong, dangerous opponent. I'll have to be at my best. but I'm confident that I will come out victorious. I believe in my team, and my team believes in me. We'll start the new year off to get to 20-0, remain busy, and make a strong case for a world title by year's end. Then you have Carlos Negron saying, this is a great opportunity for me to get a win over a strong up-and-coming fighter and show everyone what I'm capable of. I'm training hard and I've got great sparring in order to be ready for anything that Sanchez is going to bring. My experience and preparation are going to be the difference. I'm extremely motivated to give the fans a great fight and put myself in position to get a world title opportunity. Settle down there, Carlos Negron. That's probably a step too far at this point. So Jonnie Rice, he is rematching Michael Polite-Coffiee. Remember, Rice came in at a week's notice. This was a few months ago, and then he put on a career best performance, stopping the vaunted Michael Polite-Coffiee and really dominated that fight. So he says, in my last fight against Coffie, I went in there to prove myself and do what I had been training to do. It was sink or swim. I came out on top. Now I have to go back out there on January 1 and show it wasn't a fluke. This is a great stage for me to display my talents and prove that I'm capable of big things. I'm looking to give the fans a great performance, and I know that Coffie is doing the same. Don't miss this fight. And I was just sort of thinking, with some of the names that are on this card, they're sort of taken out of action. Remember, Andy Ruiz Jr. had announced that he was going to have a fight soon. And with all the names that are sort of, in this card or just recently fought, you'd have to wonder, does that mean Dominic Breazeale and Andy Ruiz Jr. is on the cards? Or maybe Ruiz Arreola too? Not that we need a rematch, but it's possible. Anyway, Michael Polite-Coffiee says, I want to get it back and make it an actual fight, this time against Jonnie Rice. Last time I was in a position where I faced some adversity and I had to make a decision to go through with the fight. I know that I can fight through adversity, and on January 1 I will be ready for whatever the fight goes. Whatever way the fight goes. On January 1 there will be a fight. Gerald Washington, obviously, he's sort of on the downside of his career. Former title challenger, has obviously starched by Charles Martin in 2020. He has had a decent win in recent years, Robert Helenius, but he says, I'm looking forward to stepping back in the ring on January 1. I'm ready to go to work, get myself back in position for some big-time fights. My experience is going to be the difference in this fight. It's going to be a great night of heavyweight action. Then we have Ali Eren Demirezen. He's facing Washington. Says, I learned a lot from my loss to Ajagba. I'm looking forward to getting another chance to box in the US. I'm still angry about the Ajagba fight because I know that I could have won. I want to show now that I belong on this stage. I'm proud to be in this position to show what I can do, what I'm going to make the most of, and I'm going to make the most of the opportunity. Then you have Vykhryst, aka Viktor Faust, and they keep pushing that Faust thing, but he says, I'm really excited to be back in the US again on January 1. So bearing in mind he was on the undercard a couple of months ago for the Fury Wilder 3 card. So who was he facing? Can't even remember. He says, I've been welcomed warmly, and fighting stateside already feels like my living room. I love the atmosphere. This is a great chance to show myself on this pay-per-view show against a very high quality opponent. I won't disappoint fans when I step in the ring. And he's facing Iago Kiladze. And I actually quite like this matchup. It is a step up, but I'll come to that in a sec. So Kaladze says, I'll be ready to fight on fight night and I'll be focused. I'm grateful for the opportunity, training hard to put on a good performance and leave the ring with a victory. So touch on that first, actually, because Vikhyryst 8-0, so he's looked pretty decent so far against limited opposition. He was a decent amateur himself. He's built up this run in the past year or so. He's been on a couple of different sort of high-profile cards. One of them I mentioned just moments ago. But Kaladze, so he's kind of been this trial horse in the heavyweight division for PBC sort of fighters. Former cruiserweight, a Georgian fighter. He's faced the likes of... in recent years, at least, F.A. Ajagba, obviously dropped the Ajagba in that one. I was about to say he beat Robert Alfonso, a PBC fighter Deontay Wilder had ties with, but he got Alfonso escaped with a draw in that one. Kaladze was robbed, and then Alfonso got sparked actually by Carlos Negron the next fight that he had. He went 5 rounds with Joe Joyce, 5 rounds with Michael Hunter, 6 rounds with Adam Kovnatsky. So he's a guy that can give you some tough rounds and give you a little bit of adversity potentially. And if Jagba found that out, got a little bit sloppy and then ended up on the seat of his pants on the canvas. But in some of these other fights, he's actually been competitive in spots. He comes to, have a go and actually gives it a good go. So I think this is a good fight for Viktor Vykhryst. But in terms of the rest of the card, so from the top, so we'll circle back to Ortiz and Martin, the pay-per-view issue in a little bit. But the co-main event, not great. So Frank Sanchez is going to win this. He's going to win it by knockout. So if you've seen Carlos Negron in recent years, he's big, tall, strong, and they keep pressing that he was a former Olympian in that, but he does have his limitations, and he is a bit slow. But the thing is, as well, Frank Sanchez, with his movement and his speed, he's going to box circles around Carlos Negron. This is good matchmaking for Frank Sanchez because it'll, again, like the Ajagba fight, showcase the talents of Frank Sanchez. And the thing with Carlos Negron, he is a little bit chinny. Has been stopped before a couple of times. Brian Howard, the 40-year-old that Ajagba knocked out, what was it, the start of the year or whatever it was, he stopped Carlos Negron not so long ago. Earlier in his career, he was stopped as well. So I expect, and actually I'll just try to see where that loss came from. So we'll get through Robert Alfonso to Carlos Negron. Where is that loss? Yeah, Dominic Brazil. That wasn't the loss that I was thinking about, though. Epifani Mendoza, and he was pretty washed at that point. But Dominic Brazil, that fight from a couple of years ago, he looked pretty good in that. But we know that Dominic Brazil is pretty slow as molasses. Negron eventually just ate something and his chin gave out. Brian Howard stopped him just in one round. So what I'm expecting is a highlight reel KO for Frank Sanchez in this co-main event. I don't think it's a very strong co-main event. It's okay, but it's kind of like this card is, as someone said to me on Twitter, it feels like it's lacking a main event. Great card, but lacking a real punchy main event. There's nothing not to take anything away from Ortiz and Martin, but they don't have the biggest fan base. They don't have the biggest charisma and profile. Well, Martin does to some extent, but I think he's more of an oddity within the heavyweight division. He doesn't have a massive casual following. Neither of these guys do. But in terms of Jonnie Rice versus Michael Polite-Coffiee 2, I like that rematch. I wasn't sure if Coffie would take it. He's hinting at some adversity ahead of that first fight. And remembering, obviously, Rice came in at a week's notice, so that obviously meant that Coffie only had a week to prepare. Coffie was originally going to be facing Gerald Washington, but Washington, I think he got COVID, something like that. In comes Jonnie Rice, career best performance, derails Michael Polite-Coffiee. So it's kind of repeat or revenge. So I like the look of that fight. I wasn't sure if it would happen, but we're going to see it. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Polite-Coffiee can get some revenge, but in the same breath, I mean, Jonnie Rice looked fantastic in fight one. I'm expecting him to pick off where he left off, so Coffee's going to have to make some adjustments. Washington versus Ali Eren Demirezen, I don't think I would have ever have called that fight and picked it. I don't think anyone would have pitted those two against each other. Washington talking about he can make his way back to big-time fights, etc. He's done really at the top level. He's had those fights where it was the loser leaves town in terms of those bigger fights in the heavyweight division. On the downslide, Ali Eren Demirezen a couple years ago on a PBC card, so against F.A. Ajagba. Good fight, fun fight, but he's got decent skills, obviously himself, a former Olympian, decent amateur in his day, but just doesn't really have a lot of pop. Gerald Washington, though, we know that the guy, I guess similar to F.A. Ajagba, doesn't move his head, so he's like a sitting duck on some of these things, but I'm not sure the much shorter Ali Eren Demirezen is going to be able to take advantage through his lack of height and reach. I mean, I could see this one where Gerald Washington trying to stick it at the end of a jab and basically keep it at range. It wouldn't surprise me. Not expecting that one to really catch fire. I think it'll be a little bit different to the Ajagba Demirezen one, because Ajagba, well, he was prepared to go to war with Demirezen. That's why they had a fun fight. It gelled because they were like, okay, we're just going to go for it. Can't see Gerald Washington do that. And if he does, I think he would come off second best. So I think he'll be more tactical and I think it will end for more of a sort of a drab sort of fight. Vykhryst and Kaladze, I think that could be a lot of fun. I think Kaladze will fancy it. He'll come out, have a go, and it wouldn't surprise me if he has some success. But the main event, Ortiz and Martin, as I said in a video a day before this one, when it was sort of mooted this was happening, I like the fight. And there is something obviously on the line here, a title eliminator in the IBF. So one of these guys could find themselves the mandatory challenger, potentially. They always sort of word these things very carefully. Remember, Martin versus Washington was a title eliminator. It sort of bumped Charles Martin all the way up the rankings. I think it was 11th or something, 9th or 11th to number 2. But they didn't say final here. It doesn't say final eliminator, but you'd have to think he'd be getting close, whoever wins this fight. But two southpaws, two heavyweights, you don't get that very often. One guy is sort of slow and plodding, big puncher in Martin, but then you have Luis Ortiz, big puncher, better skills than Martin, more well-rounded, more precise. But, he's 42 years old, and those are Cuban years. Who knows how old Luis Ortiz really is? But it is one of these sort of fights that it's an interesting fight for the sense that, the winner, the loser, where do they go? But the winner, they could be waiting around, sort of like Joe Joyce in the WBO, for some time. IBF mandatory is not necessarily the one that's going to be next, because Kubrat Pulev, he was the last IBF mandatory a year ago. They've just done the WBO, so WBA presumably next at some point. We'll have to sort of see what happens on that score, but the pay-per-view element of it. So a sort of revised price of, was it $39.99 US? Here we are, the special price even, that's what it says here in the press release. That's an interesting sort of tactic that they've decided, not one, just to drop the price, but two, to put it on pay-per-view at all, because this could have just been a fantastic fight night. One of the best, great fight night to start off the year and really signal the intentions for 2022 for PBC. And you're still doing that to some extent, but putting it behind the paywall, it's going to limit, how many people see this, because let's face it, is there huge names involved in this one? No. Martin and Ortiz, not really known as ticket sellers, and the other guys on the card here, although, good fights and good heavyweights, not necessarily known for shifting massive amounts of tickets either. So you kind of have that, and $40 basically. So if you get, 50,000 buys at $40, what's that, $2 million? Does that even cover all the sort of paydays that would be there and the costs associated with putting on the event? You tell me. So I'm not expecting that this is going to do huge numbers. 50,000 might be sort of a generous sort of estimate. But, if it was to get something like 100,000 buys, I think that would be quite high for this sort of card. If you're listening to this video, you're more than likely going to find a way to watch it because you're a hardcore boxing fan, like heavyweight fights, all that sort of stuff. I just don't know with the names on this bill how this is going to attract the casuals in. It probably won't. And I know that there will be some deluded fanboys that will sort of talk about this card being, going to do a couple 100,000 buys. It's not that sort of card. There's not the star power to do that. And don't get me wrong, I love this card. I'm a heavyweight channel, 5 heavyweight fights, and we've got some competitive matchups here. There's no real mismatch in this one, except maybe the co-main event is the biggest thing approaching a mismatch, I guess. But I like the card overall. So I will find a way to buy this fight. But sometimes these PPC cards here in New Zealand, they're not even on pay-per-view. So even the ones that are on pay-per-view in the United States, the Ruiz card was not on pay-per-view in New Zealand. So, I feel for, American fans, because really this shouldn't be on pay-per-view. But I guess we've come to expect a standard with the pandemic that sometimes we're going to have to sort of pay for play. It just sort of is this. And I've spoken about this before about heavyweights and especially the PBC stable. A lot of the sort of bigger name heavyweights, Martin, Ortiz, even guys like Washington, they expect a certain number in their payday for their paycheck. And when you have a certain amount of money and you're trying to minimize your exposure in the pandemic, where you might be getting less TV money overall, and you don't want to sort of break the bank, you want to make sure you can continue to sort of turn a profit, you've got to see these guys fighting less. Some of these guys haven't been fighting much at all, and the ones that have been fighting quite regularly, let's face it, the reason they have been is they're cheaper. A guy like Frank Sanchez will get more opportunities because he comes cheap. Right now at the stage of his career, he's trying to make a name for himself, so he comes cheaper. Ortiz and Martin expect to get paid decent money, so don't be surprised if they're taking some sort of, $300,000 or $400,000, and then obviously they'll get a percentage on top. Could be something like that. Maybe $300,000 or $400,000. Maybe it's lower than that. Maybe it's $250,000 or something like that. I don't know, but I wouldn't expect big numbers from this. I'm surprised it is on pay-per-view, but I still like the card. I like the fights. It's a good way to start 2021. Let's face it, 2022, I should say, to start that year. 2021 has been absolute crap for the heavyweight division. Anyway, at the risk of just going on, we'll wrap it up there. I like most of these fights. I think this is a really good card to kick off 2022. Is it pay-per-view worthy? Possibly not, but I guess in these times, needs must. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.